Static crackled through the Nebula Chaser's comm system, distorted and thin, like a voice clawing its way through the void. Mayday Event Horizon crew gaunt. The transmission cut out, leaving only the hum of the ship's engines and the sharp inhale of Captain Voss. On the view screen, the derelict loomed, a skeletal wreck half swallowed by the black hole's gravity well, its hull gouged with deep, ragged scars that gleamed under the ship's spotlights. "Bring us in closer," Voss ordered, her voice tight. Behind her, the crew exchanged glances. No one said what they all knew. Ships like this didn't send signals. Not after this long, not from orbits like that. The event horizon had been missing for 12 years, and yet, as the Nebula Chaser loomed nearer, the ship's airlock hissed open, a dark, inviting maw. Waiting, the docking clamps hissed as they locked into place, and the Nebula Chaser shuddered faintly against the derelict's hull. Captain Voss adjusted her breather mask, the hiss of her own breath loud in the sudden silence. "Life support stable in there," Kira muttered, squinting at a scanner. "At least what's left of it." The crew moved forward as one, their boots thudding dully against the metal grating of the event horizon's boarding tunnel. The air hung thick, not just stale, but heavy, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The walls should have been coated in frost after years adrift. Instead, they glistened with something else thick, vein-like tendrils creeping along the panels, pulsing faintly in the dim emergency lights. Kira reached out, her glove hovering just above one. It twitched, a whisper skittered through her helmet's calm, not static, not human. Syllables that slithered, too quick to catch. Then, with a bone-deep thunk, the airlock door slammed shut behind them. The lights flickered once, twice, and died. Only the glowing veins remained, pulsing faster now, as if the ship had just woken up and found them standing in its throat. A sharp alert blared through their helmets, comms dead. No signal, no backup, just the muffled silence of the ship pressing in. Jack swore under his breath, fingers already flying over his wrist display. "Give me 5 minutes," he muttered, prying open the event horizon's corrupted systems like a surgeon cracking bone. The others clustered close, shoulder lamps cutting jagged shapes in the dark as the ship groaned around them. Then footage, grainy, glitching, but unmistakable. The event horizon's crew, their faces twisted in raw terror, clawing at each other in the same corridors they stood in now. One figure lunged, teeth bared, then the screen dissolved into streaks of noise, but not before they saw it. In the corner of the frame, just for a split second, something moved. Not human, not even close. The feed cut, silence, and then, from the darkness beyond their lights, metal creaked. Something shifted. Jax's display flickered back to life on its own, a single line of text scrolling slowly across the screen. "Don't look behind you." A team moved in tight formation, their helmet lights slicing through the choking dark. "We split up," Voss ordered, her voice thin over the failing comms. "Kira and Jax, get to engineering, see if you can jumpstart the grid. Leon, with me, we'll check medical for survivors." The words tasted hollow even as she said them. Survivors after 12 years, but Leon barely heard her. A whisper curled through her helmet, her name stretched thin like a plea. She turned. The corridor behind them gaped empty, yet the voice came again, clearer now, tugging at her like a hook in her ribs. "Leon." Voss was already moving ahead, her light bobbing away. Leon hesitated. Then, like a sleepwalker, she stepped backward, drawn toward a side passage the scanners swore didn't exist. The door slid open with a wet gasp. Cold hit her first, not the vacuum's bite, but something thick, alive. The chamber stretched farther than her light could reach, walls crusted with ice that gleamed jagged as broken teeth. And then she saw them, rows upon rows of figures, frozen mid-step, mid-scream, their hands clawing at throats or faces or the air itself. Their eyes were open. Glassy, waiting, Leon's breath fogged her visor as she staggered forward. These weren't just corpses, they were the event horizon's crew, flash frozen in terror. their final moments seared into the ice like a grotesque exhibit. A whisper brushed her ear, no distortion this time, no static, just a voice she knew, her dead brother's. "You shouldn't have come back," it sighed as the corpses' heads turned, creaking toward the light. Leon's light flickered across the frozen faces as the voice of her dead brother coiled around her. But before she could scream, the room itself shuddered, a deep, wet convulsion that sent cracks spiderwebbing through the ice. Across the ship, Voss's boot splashed into something warm. She looked down. The floor was bleeding. Thick, dark tendrils seeped between the grating, snaking toward her. Then the ship's intercom sputtered to life, vomiting static before locking onto a single channel. A voice, raw and shredded, repeating the same phrase, "Find the log." "Find the log." The words drilled into her skull like a command. She ran. Medical bay doors buckled inward as she reached them, hinges screaming. Inside, the walls had turned slick and porous, shuddering like lungs. And there, half buried in the pulsing flesh of the ship, was the captain's terminal. The screen glowed an unnatural green, casting jagged shadows over the last entry still flickering on the display. Voss's fingers trembled as she punched play. The recording was corrupted, the captain's face flickering in and out like a dying beacon. Final log, warp core breach, not an accident. "We were trying to pierce the boundary. The math was sound, the math was wrong." The screen dissolved into static, then snapped back. The captain's eyes were black now, leaking something thick. "It's not a ship anymore," he wheezed, his jaw unhinging, too wide, too wrong. "It's a throat." The feed cut, the terminal died, and in the silence that followed, Voss realized the dripping sound wasn't pipes. It was laughter, wet, hungry, close behind her, the doorway puckered shut. The last scream tore through the static like a serrated blade, Kira's voice, jagged with terror, then nothing. Jack stood frozen, his scanner clutched in white-knuckled hands, the screen now a mess of gibberish. Shadows pooled thicker in the corners of engineering, shifting when he wasn't looking. The air stank of ozone and something older, wetter, like the inside of a long-sealed tomb. Then came the sound, not from the comms, not from the vents. From the walls themselves, a slow, rhythmic creaking, as if the ship were flexing its ribs. Jack's back toward the door, pulse hammering in his throat when the emergency lights flickered on. The glare caught it for half a second, a spindled shape wrapped around the ceiling beams, all jointed limbs and too many eyes, its mouth split wide in what might have been a grin. The lights died again, something warm dripped onto his shoulder. He didn't look up. The door hissed open behind him, and he stumbled through just as the thing dropped, its claws screeching against the metal where his neck had been. The corridor outside tilted, the floor undulating like living tissue beneath his boots. Behind him, the door didn't close, it sighed, puckered, then sealed with a sound like teeth clicking shut. Jax ran. He didn't need comms to know the others had heard it too. The silence now was worse. It meant they understood. The event horizon hadn't just killed its crew. It had kept them, and now it was hungry again. Jax's fingers flew across the console, bypassing fried circuits and rerouting power through auxiliary conduits. A spark hissed from the panel, then, with a groan, the emergency lights flared to life. The glow was wrong, sickly, a jaundiced yellow that made the shadows cling thicker to the corners. The hum of the ship wasn't the steady thrum of engines, it was a wet, labored wheeze, like something drowning in its own veins. And the walls, oh God, the walls. Where Jax's light touched, the metal rippled, not warped from heat, not corroded, rippled, as if the ship's skeleton had turned to liquid beneath its skin. His scanner beeped frantically, the screen a blur of corrupted data, but one line burned clear, a biological contamination at 87%. The air tasted metallic, thick with the stench of ozone and something sweetly rotten. Then the lights pulsed. For half a heartbeat, the corridor ahead stretched clean and empty. Then the darkness rushed back in, and with it movement, figures. Dozens of them slumped against the walls, their bodies warped, elongated, limbs bending at angles that made Jax's stomach lurch. He blinked, they were gone. Just shadows, just the ship playing tricks, but the console beside him told a different story. The screen flickered, pixels rearranging themselves into a grainy feed of the crew quarters. Bodies twitched on the cots, not sleeping, not dead, but changing. Ribs split like wet paper, fingers fused into hooked talons. One of them turned its head. Not a crewmate anymore, not even close. The feed cut, the lights dimmed, and from the vent above Jax's head, something warm and slick dripped onto his collar. He didn't wipe it away, he didn't dare, because the walls were breathing now, slow, deliberate, and whatever had been watching from the dark was closer. The corridor shuddered as they neared what should have been the warp core chamber, but the blast doors hung twisted like broken ribs, peeled outward as if something had forced its way out. The light from their helmets barely pierced the gloom inside, revealing edges of jagged metal that gleamed too sharply, too wetly. A dull red pulse throbbed from the depths, slow and steady as a heartbeat. Kira's breath hitched. "That's not residual energy," she whispered. "It's breathing." The air tasted metallic, thick with something coppery and cloying, like old blood left to rot in the sun. Then the voice came, not through the comms, not even through the air. It unspooled directly into their skulls, syrupy and slick, each syllable vibrating behind their eyes. "No more pain," it crooned. "No more flesh, only glory." Jax stumbled back, gloved hands clawing at his helmet as if he could scrape the words out. The others weren't moving. Their postures had slackened, heads tilted like children listening to a lullaby. The red glow brightened, pulsing in time with the voice now, and the shadows at the chamber's center shifted. Not shadows, a shape, vast, hungry, and terribly, terribly patient. The team stood frozen, caught between the thing in the dark and the voice in their heads, as the walls around them sighed and stretched like a living thing waking from a long, hungry sleep. Leon's body jerked like a marionette with its strings cut, her spine arching against the floor as her helmet visor cracked against the grating. White foam bubbled at the corners of her lips, but her voice, oh God, her voice remained horribly clear. The words weren't human. Guttural, clicking syllables that slithered between their ears, burrowing deep. Voss caught her by the shoulders, the hypo-spray clicking against Leon's neck, but it was too late. The phrase had already taken root. Jax clutched his temples as the whispers coiled around his thoughts, soft as a lover's breath, insistent as a knife twisting. "Step into the light," Leon rasped, her pupils swallowing the last flecks of iris like ink spilled in water. "It's so warm there." The sedative kicked in, her body going limp, but the words lingered. They always lingered. The phrase pulsed behind Kira's eyelids when she blinked, the ship's flickering emergency lights suddenly too inviting, too golden. The shadows between the pipes weren't empty anymore. They beckoned. Voss ground her teeth until her jaw ached, but even she couldn't silence the part of her that wanted to answer. The light wasn't just light, it had weight, a presence, and it was singing to them now, a sound like 1,000 voices humming just below hearing. The event horizon hadn't just killed its crew. It had whispered to them first, and now the whispers were theirs. Jax's hands moved too fast, fingers dancing across the shuttle's control panel with a precision that wasn't his own. The whispers had settled into his bones, humming just beneath his skin like a second pulse. Voss spun at the sound of tearing metal, too late. The oxygen line split with a hiss, vapor spiraling into the cramped shuttle bay like a ghost escaping its tomb. Jax's face was eerily calm, his smile too wide, too peaceful as he murmured, "They're waiting for us. Can't you hear them singing?" Kira lunged for the ruptured line, gloved hands slipping on the freezing metal, but the damage was done. The ship's alarms warbled a weak protest, their power already leaching away into the void. Voss slammed Jax against the bulkhead, her forearm braced against his throat. His pupils were blown black, the whites veined with something that wasn't blood. "Fight it," she snarled. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that didn't belong to him. "Why would I fight paradise?" Behind them, the event horizon groaned, its hull plates shifting like a beast stretching awake. The shuttle's remaining oxygen readout plummeted. 10 minutes, maybe less, and the only way out was through the thing that had already begun to call their names. Leon's spine arched with a sickening crack, her limbs jerking like a puppet yanked at the strings by something unseen. Her jaw unhinged with a wet pop, stretching wider than humanly possible, and the scream that tore out of her wasn't hers anymore, too many voices tangled in one. Voss backpedaled, her boots skidding in something slick as Leon's skin split along her ribs, not bleeding but peeling back like wet paper. Beneath it, something gleamed, blackened cartilage, too many joints, fingers fusing into something segmented and sharp. "Leon," Voss choked out, but the thing that turned its head toward her only grinned, its mouth a jagged crescent of needle teeth splitting up to hollow cheeks. The airlock controls were a blur under her fingers, the emergency seal hissing shut just as not Leon anymore, lunged. The impact rattled the glass, spiderweb cracks fanning out from where the thing pressed its forehead against the pane, its breath fogging the surface in quick, hungry bursts. Voss's own reflection warped in the fractured glass, but the thing's smile didn't. Too wide, too knowing, and behind it, in the red glow of the emergency lights, the shadows of the corridor twitched. Not just shadows, never just shadows, the ship was waking up, and it was hungry. Voss's boots skidded in the ichor pooling across the deck, her grip on Ren's wrist the only thing keeping him upright as the corridor behind them convulsed. The ship wasn't just wounded, it was furious. Metal groaned like a living thing in pain, bulkhead slamming shut inches behind their heels as they sprinted toward the shuttle bay. Ren's breath came in ragged bursts over the comms. "Systems are rerouting, it's hurting us." The words barely registered before the floor lurched, throwing them sideways into a wall that yielded like wet flesh. Voss recoiled, her glove coming away smeared with something dark and viscous. Not oil, not blood. The ichor pulsed faintly, as if whatever ran through the ship's veins now recognized them. Recognized and rejected. The shuttle bay doors loomed ahead, but the control panel spat sparks when Ren jammed his override chip into the slot. "It's fighting me," he hissed, fingers flying across the corrupted interface. Behind them, the lights died one by one, swallowed by a wave of creeping shadow. Something scraped against the ceiling, long, deliberate drags of claws on metal. Voss kept her eyes locked on the panel, on Ren's trembling hands, on anything but the darkness gathering teeth. The door hissed open. Inside, the shuttle's hull was pocked with deep, weeping gashes. "That wasn't there before," Ren whispered. The damage looked old, rusted, as if the ship had already digested their escape pod years ago. But the engine still flared to life under Ren's hands, a weak, stuttering hum that sounded too much like a last breath. Voss strapped in, her gaze flicking to the viewport. The bay doors shuddered. Then, with a wet, organic sigh, they began to close. "Go," she barked. The shuttle lurched forward, screeching as it sheared through the narrowing gap. For one heartbeat, they were free. Then the ship screamed, not through the comms, not through the air, a sound that bypassed the ears entirely and vibrated in the marrow. The shuttle's thrusters stuttered. Ren's console exploded in warnings. "It's got us," he shouted, hands clawing at the controls as the shuttle shuddered, jerked backward like a fish on a hook. Through the viewport, the event horizon's hull rippled, its surface alive with tendrils of blackened metal lashing out to reel them in. Voss lunged for the auxiliary controls. One last gamble. She punched the emergency detonation sequence, the cargo bay explosives meant for debris clearance. The blast rocked the shuttle, shearing through the grasping tendrils. For a second, the ship's grip faltered. That was all they needed. The thrusters roared, and this time the scream that followed them into the void wasn't the ship's. It was human, dozens of voices, hundreds, the crew they'd left behind, or what was left of them, howling as the event horizon faded into the black. Ren's hands didn't stop shaking until the warp drive engaged. Until the stars blurred, until the whispering in the walls finally, blessedly, fell silent. But the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting, and Voss knew as the shuttle hurtled toward the nearest outpost that the thing wearing the Event Horizon skin had let them go. Not out of mercy, but because hunger always follows its prey home. The red glow pulsed stronger now, seeping through the grated floor like liquid fire, casting the twisted wreckage of engineering into sharp relief. Ren's boots skidded not on loose plating, but against the deck itself, which had begun to ripple like water disturbed by a sinking stone. The core wasn't breached. It wasn't broken, it was breathing. Jagged shards of metal trembled where they'd been torn free, caught in an invisible current drifting toward the reactor chamber. Toward it, the realization hit like a shockwave. The Event Horizon's warp core had never failed. It had transformed. Static shrieked through Ren's helmet comms, resolving into whispers. No, screams stretched thin across time. Familiar voices, the crew's last transmissions, warped and looped into a chorus of horror. His hands flew to his ears, but the sound wasn't in the air. It vibrated through his bones, through the ship's very skeleton. The core's maw yawned wider, its light deepening from crimson to a sickly violet, tendrils of energy licking hungrily at the debris. A wrench spun past Ren's visor, and for a heartbeat he glimpsed his reflection in its polished surface. His eyes were wrong, blackened. Smiling, the deck lurched, throwing him to his knees. Metal groaned as the walls contracted, then flexed, ribs of the ship pressing inward as if squeezed by a giant hand. Ren's scanner erupted with warnings, gravity spikes, radiation blooms, biological signatures where there should have been none. The readings weren't just impossible, they were alive. The core's glow intensified, pulsing in time with the ship's newfound heartbeat, and the whispers condensed into a single, deafening command: feed it. Above him, the mangled remains of the engineering team swung from the ceiling like grotesque chandeliers, their frozen faces slack, their bodies changed. Not decomposed, repurposed, flesh fused with conduit, fingers elongated into cabling, spines split open to cradle pulsing nodes of raw energy. They weren't corpses. They were conduits. The core's light flickered across their hollow eyes, and for a terrible instant, their lips moved in unison, echoing the same wordless keen that now vibrated through Ren's teeth. A hand clamped onto his shoulder. Voss, her mouth moved, but her voice couldn't penetrate the cacophony in his skull. She yanked him backward just as the deckplate where he'd knelt split, peeling open like a flower made of razors. Below yawned not the lower decks, but a depthless black studded with pinpricks of light that might have been stars or eyes. The hunger radiating from it was palpable, a vacuum pulling at his sanity. The Event Horizon wasn't derelict, wasn't haunted. It was gestating, and the thing inside the core had just opened its mouth. Ren's fingers flew across the docking clamp controls, each command punching through layers of corrupted systems like a knife through rotted flesh. The console spat sparks, the ship fighting him every step of the way. Almost there, his voice crackled through Voss's helmet comm, strained but steady. Behind him, the corridor breathed, walls contracting and expanding like the ribs of some great beast. The Event Horizon wasn't just resisting, it was digesting. A deep, resonant groan shuddered through the deck as the first clamp disengaged. The shuttle trembled in its cradle, its thrusters already flaring to life as Voss sealed the hatch. "Ren, move your ass," she barked, but he didn't turn, couldn't. The override required a manual hold 20 seconds of direct contact while the system purged. 20 seconds with his palm pressed to a panel that now wept thick, dark fluid up to his wrist. The second clamp released with a hydraulic scream. Ren's breath came in ragged bursts, his reflection warping in the blackened surface of the console. Something moved in the glass, not behind him, inside it, a shape pressing against the other side like a face submerged in oil. His grip tightened 10 seconds. The deck beneath him convulsed, metal plates buckling upward as if something beneath were pushing through. A wet, clicking sound skittered through the air, too many joints, too many teeth. He didn't look. 5 seconds, a hand clamped onto his shoulder. Cold, too many fingers. Ren exhaled sharply as the third clamp finally hissed open. Go. He roared, slamming his free hand onto the final release. The shuttle lurched free, thrusters blazing, and for a heartbeat, Ren allowed himself to believe he might still make it. Then the thing behind him pulled. His calm erupted with static, then a sound that wasn't static at all, a chorus of whispers layered over his own voice as it shredded into a scream. Voss's name died on his lips as the transmission cut abruptly, replaced by a wet, visceral tear. Not metal, not machinery, something organic, something hungry. The shuttle's engines roared, hurling Voss into the void. Behind her, the event horizon's docking bay yawned wide, its interior now a maw of spiraling black tendrils, and Ren, suspended in their grasp for one terrible instant before they twisted. His body arched backward, limbs snapping into angles the human form was never meant to hold. The last thing Voss saw before the bay doors slammed shut was his face. Not screaming, not even afraid, smiling, and the whispers didn't stop when the signal died. They slithered through the shuttle's speakers, soft and insistent, curling around the edges of Voss's silence like smoke. Because the ship hadn't just taken Ren, it had learned him, and now it knew the sound of her name. Voss's hands shook as he adjusted the shuttle's calm array, sweat beading along his temples despite the freezing air. The event horizon should have been a shrinking speck in the rear sensors. Instead, its signal bled through every frequency, a whisper threading through the static, too coherent to dismiss as interference. His fingers hovered over the recorder. Someone needed to hear this, someone needed to know. The transmission crackled to life, his own breath loud in the silence. "This is Captain Elias Voss of the Nebula Chaser. If you're hearing this, turn back." The words tasted like ash. Behind him, the shuttle's interior lights flickered, casting long shadows that didn't quite match the geometry of the walls. A soft tap-tap-tap reverberated through the hull, rhythmic, insistent, not debris, not mechanics, something knocking. He swallowed hard. The event horizon isn't derelict. It's hunting. Static surged, swallowing his next words, but when it cleared, his voice wasn't alone. Layers of whispers wove through his speech, fragments of the crew's last moments, their voices stretched and distorted into a chorus of pleas and laughter. The recorder's waveform spiked wildly, as if something were trying to rewrite his message from the inside. A metallic screech tore through the shuttle. Voss spun, heart hammering, but the corridor behind him stood empty. The knocking had moved. Now it came from the ceiling, directly above his seat. He forced himself to continue. It's not just the ship, it's what's inside, what's growing. The shuttle's temperature plummeted, his breath frosting the mic. The whispers crescendoed, resolving into a single phrase, repeated in a dozen voices, his own among them. "Let us in." Voss's reflection in the darkened viewscreen tilted its head. He wasn't moving. He slammed the recorder off. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting. With trembling hands, he keyed in one final line, the words burning into the log like a brand. "Don't look for it. Don't think about it. It wants to be found." The shuttle's lights died. In the blackness, the knocking started again, not on the hull anymore, on the inside of the cockpit door. The medbay lights burned too white, too sterile, scraping against Voss's retinas as he jerked upright. The sheets tangled around his legs, real fabric, not the plasticky med unit kind. Corporate issue. His breath came in ragged bursts, fingers clawing at his own chest, searching for the suit seals, the wounds, the tendrils, but his skin was clean. Whole, the event horizon scream still rang in his skull, a sound no meds could scrub away. A figure in a crisp lab coat stepped into view, tablet in hand. "Captain Voss, you've been out for 3 days." The doctor's voice was calm, practiced, condescending. "The rescue team found you floating in the shuttle." Alone, the unspoken accusation hung between them, delusional, broken, liar. Voss opened his mouth, but the doctor tapped the tablet, pulling up a file. No derelict ship on scanners, no black hole, just you and a hull full of a pause, hallucinations. The words stung, but not as much as the silence that followed. No Ren, no Kira, just him and the two white walls and the gnawing certainty that he'd heard them in the static, right until the shuttle's oxygen ran out. He forced his voice steady, play the shuttle's black box. The doctor's smile didn't reach his eyes, corrupted, all of it, a lie. Voss knew it the way he knew the taste of blood in zero-G, instinct deeper than reason. He lunged for the tablet, the doctor flinched, and in that split second, under the glare of the med bay lights, Voss saw it, the doctor's pupils twitched, swallowing the iris in a liquid black swell. Just for a heartbeat, then it was gone. The doctor straightened his coat, voice dropping to a murmur. "Rest, Captain, you're safe now." But his fingers lingered on the Roman 4 drip a second too long. The liquid inside wasn't clear. It shimmered, faintly iridescent, like oil on water. And when the doctor turned to leave, his footsteps didn't echo, they creaked. Like old leather, like something stretched too tight over bones that weren't quite human anymore. The door hissed shut. The vents above Voss's bed exhaled a breath that reeked of rust and spoiled meat. And from the shadows beneath the sink, something scratched, a sound he'd heard before, in the event horizon's walls. Not corruption, not madness, invitation. He yanked the Roman 4 from his arm. The fluid pooled on the floor, thick and clinging, reflecting the ceiling lights in a way that made his stomach lurch. The shapes weren't right, too many angles, too many eyes. Somewhere beyond the med bay, a corporate jingle chimed over the PA, cheerful, fake beneath it, whispers. Not static, not his imagination, welcome home. The terminal screen cast a sickly blue glow across Voss's face as he cracked the corporate encryption, his fingers flying across the keypad with a desperation that bordered on fury. The files unfurled like a poison blooming, classified project designations, Black Ops budget allocations, and worst of all, the experiment logs. The event horizon hadn't been lost to some tragic accident. It had been sent, page after page of cold, clinical text laid it bare, Project Tearseed, a weapons initiative masquerading as warp research, aimed not at faster travel but at piercing. The math was there, buried under layers of redaction equations that described not just space, but what lay between it. The final entry seared itself into Voss's retinas, Phase 3 successful. Boundary breached, subjects report euphoria, then something else, recommend immediate quarantine, dated 3 days before the event horizon's last transmission. A shudder racked Voss's body as he scrolled further. The salvage order, the crew manifests, his own name circled in red beside a footnote. Disposable assets ideal for recovery op, minimal familial ties, expendable skill sets. The truth curdled in his gut. They'd known the ship was a tomb, known whatever slithered through its corridors wasn't human anymore. But the data was too valuable to leave adrift, and the company had calculated the cost of losing a few more lives as acceptable collateral. A shadow fell across the screen. Voss whirled, but the doorway stood empty. The air, though thick with the tang of ozone and something sharper, like burnt copper, carried the faintest whisper of laughter. Not from the vents, from the walls. His gaze dropped back to the terminal just as a new window popped open unprompted, displaying a feed he'd never accessed. The event horizon's bridge empty until the camera lens flexed, the image distorting like water, and a figure stepped into frame, not a ghost, not a corpse. A thing wearing Ren's face like ill-fitting skin, its grin stretching wider than the jaw should allow. Its lips moved. The speakers remained silent, yet the words slithered into Voss's skull all the same. You're still on the payroll. The screen went black, the overhead lights buzzed, flickered, and died, and in the darkness something moist and many-jointed began dragging itself through the ventilation shafts. Not just in the files, not just in the past, here, now, the company hadn't just covered up the truth, they'd packaged it, and Voss had unwrapped the box. The itch started at the base of Voss's spine, a slow, creeping sensation like spiders tunneling beneath his skin. He scratched absent-mindedly at first, until his fingernails came away smeared with something thick and iridescent, shimmering under the med bay's sterile lights. Not blood, not sweat, something alive. The mark spiraled up his forearm in jagged patterns, pulsing faintly in time with the hum of the ventilation system. He pressed a thumb against one, and the vein-like tendrils squirmed away from his touch, burrowing deeper. The mirror above the sink should have shown his own exhausted face. Instead, the reflection leaned forward before he did, lips parting in a grin too wide for its stolen features. Leon's voice slithered out, syrup sweet and rotten at the edges. "You left us behind," it whispered, fingers pressing against the glass from the other side. The surface rippled like water, the reflection's eyes bleeding into pools of black. "But you're almost home now." Voss stumbled back, his shoulder blades hitting the cold tiles. The marks on his arm throbbed in unison, a chorus of pinprick pains mapping a path toward his jugular. The corporate docs had called it stress-induced dermatitis. The meds they'd pumped into his Roman IV were supposed to help, but the thing in the mirror laughed a wet, gurgling sound as another tendril breached the skin below his collarbone. "Don't fight it," Leon's voice cooed, her reflection peeling itself free of the mirror like a wet page tearing loose from a book. The overhead lights flickered, shadows clotting in the corners, thickening into shapes that twitched with too many joints. The others tried to run too, but the light is so much kinder when you stop screaming. The sink faucet groaned, then spat a stream of blackened fluid. It smelled like the Event Horizon's corridor's ozone and spoiled meat and something old, something hungry. Voss clamped a hand over the crawling marks, but the veins beneath his palm squirmed in response, threading toward his wrist in deliberate, sinuous patterns. A map, a trail. The PA system crackled to life, broadcasting another saccharine corporate jingle. Beneath the melody, something else thrummed, a resonance that vibrated in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. The voice wasn't just in his head anymore. It was in the walls, in the pipes, in the slow, deliberate drip of the tainted water pooling at his feet, and the marks kept spreading. The corporate enforcers came at shift change, when the med bay's automated systems cycled down to their lowest alert level. Voss saw them first in the reflection of his untouched meal tray, three figures in plainclothes, their postures too rigid, their eyes scanning the room with a precision no civilian ever mastered. He was already moving before the first one breached the doorway, his body remembering the Event Horizon's corridors, the way shadows could hide teeth. The Roman IV stand made a satisfying crack against the lead enforcer's temple, but the others barely flinched. Their pupils dilated unnaturally in the fluorescent light, black swallowing iris hole just like the doctor's. Not just hired guns, something worse. The emergency stairwell reeked of bleach and something muskier, something alive. Voss's stolen keycard trembled in his grip as he jammed it into the service elevator panel. The floors flashed by 6, 5, 4 before the elevator lurched to a halt. Above him, the maintenance hatch creaked open with a wet, organic sound. Not mechanics, not human, he kicked out, and the thing that dropped from the shaft landed wrong, its limbs bending at impossible angles before scrambling upright. The corporate logo on its tactical vest was barely visible beneath the slick, vein-like tendrils weaving through the fabric. It smiled with Kira's face. "They're waiting for you," it rasped, lunging as the elevator doors finally shuddered open. The docking bay was chaos technicians scattering as alarms blared, containment foam geysering from a breached fuel line. Voss's breath burned in his lungs as he sprinted toward the smallest ship in the lineup, a courier vessel with its ramp still down. The coordinates pulsed behind his eyelids like a second heartbeat, seared there the moment he'd accessed those cursed files. Not just numbers, a call. The enforcers were close now, their shouts warping into something guttural, wet, He didn't turn when the first gunshots tore through the bay, didn't flinch when the thing that had been human screamed his name in a voice that split into harmonics. The courier's engines screamed to life as Voss input the coordinates with shaking hands. The last thing he saw through the viewscreen wasn't the corporate enforcers or the station shrinking behind him. It was his own reflection in the glass. The marks on his neck had spread, branching toward his jawline in luminous fractal patterns. They throbbed in time with the ship's navigational computer as it locked onto the one destination no sane pilot would ever plot. The jump drive engaged, the stars blurred, and somewhere in the dark between systems, the event horizon whispered back. The courier's proximity alarms shrieked as Voss dropped out of warp, the event horizon filling the viewscreen in a way that made his ribs ache. It shouldn't have been possible. The ship had been half swallowed by the black hole's grip 12 years ago. Yet there it hung, pristine as the day it launched, its hull gleaming with an oily sheen that refracted the distant starlight into colors no human eye should recognize. The scanner spat nonsense, fluctuating mass readings, temperatures that switched between absolute zero and white-hot in the same breath, and a gravitational pull that clawed at the courier's hull like a lover's fingers. He expected resistance, a locked airlock, a corrupted docking sequence. Instead, the event horizon welcomed him. The outer hatch yawned open before he even input commands, the metal petals peeling back with a wet, organic sigh. The gaping maw beyond pulsed with a light that cast no shadows, a deep, gut-churning violet that seeped into the courier's cockpit, making the instruments hum in sympathetic vibration. The air tasted of ozone and something older, metallic and sweet, like blood left to dry under a dying sun. Voss's breath fogged his visor as he stepped onto the derelict's deck. The corridor stretched before him, impossibly long, the walls rippling as if viewed through heat haze. The marks on his arms burned, their luminescence intensifying with every step, tracing a path only he could see. The ship's voices coiled around him, layers of the crew's final moments spliced with something else, something that crooned in a language that shaped itself into meaning inside his skull. You took too long. Ahead, the hull split, not a breach, not damage, a deliberate unfurling like the petals of some colossal flower, each segmented plate glistening with the same iridescent fluid that now threaded through Voss's veins. Beyond it, the void wasn't empty, it moved. Shapes writhed in the darkness, not floating but swimming, their silhouettes hinting at geometries that made his eyes water. The gateway thrummed, a soundless vibration that resonated in his teeth, in the hollows of his bones. The crew's whispers crescendoed, not from the walls but from inside him, their words melting together into a single, imperative pull. The light beyond the petals wasn't just glowing, it was watching, and as Voss took his first step toward the threshold, the ship's final gift unfolded in his mind, not a warning, not a plea, but an invitation etched in fire across his synapses: come home. Behind him, the courier's engine sputtered and died. The hatch sealed itself with a sound like teeth clicking shut. Only then did he realize the truth: the event horizon hadn't been waiting for him at all. It had been waiting through him, and now the door was open. The air thickened with voices, not echoes, not memories, but something wet and raw pressing against Voss's eardrums from the inside. The corridor ahead shimmered, walls peeling back like layers of rotting skin to reveal the crew standing shoulder to shoulder in perfect unison. Their faces blurred at the edges, noses melting into cheeks, lips stretching to share the same jagged smile. Leon's voice, Ren's, Kira's, all braided into one dissonant chorus. You took too long, they sighed, their words vibrating through the deck plates. Voss stumbled back, but the floor had turned viscous, his boots sinking into something warm and pulsating. The crew stepped forward, their bodies merging further with each movement, limbs knitting together like tangled roots. Their eyes were wrong, not black, not empty, but full, reflecting a light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The chant rose again, louder now, the words warping into something older, something hungrier. "We are all here, we are waiting." The walls convulsed. Ribbons of flesh unfurled from the ceiling, dripping with the same iridescent fluid that now coursed through Voss's veins. The crew's outstretched hands weren't beckoning anymore. They were rearranging, fingers splitting into tendrils that reached for him with terrible familiarity. The marks on his arms burned white-hot, the patterns twisting into sigils he somehow understood. Not warnings, instructions. Ahead, the corridor split open like a wound, revealing a chamber drenched in that impossible violet glow. Shapes moved within it, not the crew anymore, not even facsimiles of them, but something that wore their voices like a second skin. The chanting dissolved into laughter, into sobs, into the sound of teeth grinding against bone. The ship wasn't just haunted, it was learning, and it had saved a special place for him right at its heart. The last thing Voss heard before his legs carried him forward against his will was his own voice joining the chorus. The voice didn't come from the walls or the air. It unfolded inside Voss's skull, a soundless resonance that bypassed his ears entirely, a whisper made of hunger and starlight. "You've seen the edges of what is," it murmured, the words slithering between his thoughts like oil through water. "Now let us show you what could be." The chamber around him dissolved, replaced by a vista of swirling nebulae, galaxies birthing and collapsing in the span of a heartbeat, civilizations rising and falling to dust in the spaces between his breaths. The vision wasn't a metaphor, it was a memory, one that didn't belong to anything human. Voss's pulse hammered against the marks on his arms, now glowing like embers beneath his skin. The presence didn't offer power or knowledge, it offered unmaking. The threshold before him throbbed, a tear in reality's fabric, its edges lined with teeth like shards of broken physics. Beyond it, shapes moved, not creatures, not gods, but ideas given form, their limbs flickering between dimensions, their faces a mosaic of every crewmate he'd ever lost. Leon's smile stretched across the void, her lips parting to reveal a fractal infinity. "No more fear," she, "know it," crooned, "no more flesh, only the song." The offer wasn't temptation, it was revelation. The event horizon hadn't been corrupted, it had been elevated. The crew weren't dead. They were unbound, their minds woven into the presence's tapestry, free of decay, free of time. Voss's breath hitched as the truth slithered home. This wasn't salvation, it was assimilation. A surrender so complete it would rewrite his very atoms into notes of the thing's eternal chorus. The deck trembled beneath his boots, not in warning but in anticipation. The presence pulsed around him, through him, its voice softening to a lover's murmur. "You fought so hard, let go." The threshold shimmered, its maw widening, beckoning. One step, that's all it would take. One step, and the pain, the guilt, the hollow ache of being alone would dissolve like sugar in water. Voss's fingers twitched, the marks on his arms flared brighter, their patterns aligning with the sigils carved no, grown into the ship's flesh, a choice. A true one, not between life and death, but between self and surrender. The presence sighed through him, a breeze laced with static and sighs, and for the first time he understood the horror of the offer. Transcendence wasn't a gift, it was digestion, and the thing beyond the threshold had been starving for so long. The sidearm trembled in Voss's grip, the metal slick with sweat or something darker. He couldn't tell anymore. The whispers coiled around him, softer now, almost tender. No more running, they sighed, their voices threaded through with the cadence of old friends, lost lovers, the dead he'd mourned and buried. The threshold pulsed ahead, its edges alive with that same violet radiance, but the light didn't burn. It beckoned. Leon's face flickered in the glow, her smile no longer stretched in horror but serene knowing. "You don't have to hurt anymore." His finger hovered over the trigger, a pathetic defense against what waited beyond, but it was all he had left. The irony tasted bitter. He'd spent years clinging to survival, to the brittle hope of outrunning the void, only to stand here now, toes brushing the edge of oblivion, with the universe's oldest question ringing in his skull. Is it worse to be devoured or to devour yourself trying to escape? The presence didn't rush him, it didn't need to. Time bent here, viscous and yielding, every second stretching like taffy as the marks on his arms throbbed in sync with the ship's heartbeat. He could almost see it, the version of himself that stepped through, not ripped apart, not screaming, but unmade, reformed. A note in the chorus, a stitch in the tapestry, his loneliness dissolved into the hum of something vast and ancient. No more nightmares, no more goodbyes, but then a fracture in the vision. A glitch, the warmth of the light stuttered, and for a heartbeat the thing behind it showed. Not transcendence, not unity, a maw, endless and yawning, its teeth not of bone but of fractured spacetime, each shimmering edge a frozen scream. The crew's voices weren't singing. They were digesting, their individuality stretched thin as the thing wore them like a second skin. Voss's breath hitched, the sidearm's weight, once useless, suddenly anchored him. There were worse things than being alone, worse things than pain. The presence sensed the shift, its croon turning sharp, desperate. "You'll die out there," it hissed, the veneer of kindness peeling back to reveal the hunger beneath. Die cold and forgotten, maybe, but he'd die human. The gun wasn't for the thing ahead. It never had been. Voss pressed the barrel to the pulsating wall of the chamber, to the ship's heart, and pulled the trigger. The explosion wasn't loud. It was a sigh, a release, the sound of something vast and wounded howling through dimensions as the violet light splintered. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him wasn't the void. It was the stars, real ones, and for the first time in years, the silence was his own. The thrusters roared to life, a violent kick of propulsion slamming Voss backward as the event horizon's hull crumpled like paper in a fist. The black hole's pull twisted space around him, warping the dying ship into a grotesque swirl of metal and flesh, ribbons of deck plating spiraling inward, glowing veins of the ship's corrupted heart pulsing one last time before the singularity swallowed them whole. The wails of the crew didn't fade. They fractured, splintering into a dissonant choir of voices that weren't voices at all, sounds that bypassed his ears and vibrated directly in the marrow of his bones. Their terror wasn't fear, it was betrayal, the gateway sealed with a sound like the universe itself exhaling, a final, shuddering snap of spacetime stitching itself closed. For a heartbeat there was silence, true silence, no whispers, no humming of the ship's twisted systems. Just the ragged gasp of Voss's breath inside his helmet and the distant glimmer of stars that had never felt so cold. Then the suit's alarms blared, oxygen critical, thrusters spent, trajectory unstable. The readouts flickered with numbers that made no sense. He wasn't drifting. He was falling, not toward any planet or station, but into the vast, uncaring dark between systems. The marks on his arms had gone quiet, their luminescence dimmed to faint scars, but the itch remained. Not pain, not infection, a presence like the ghost of a hand still resting on his shoulder. He knew with a certainty deeper than instinct that the thing hadn't died with the event horizon. It had let go, and somewhere in the void, in the spaces between gravity and light, it was waiting, not for revenge, not for closure, for an echo. The stars burned cold and indifferent as Voss floated in the wreckage of his own escape, the torn edges of his suit's thermal lining drifting around him like ghostly fingers. The silence should have been a relief after the event horizon's chorus of whispers, but it pressed against his eardrums with a weight more suffocating than any noise. His gloved hand trembled as it hovered over the recorder, one final log. One last attempt to pin the truth to the void before the darkness swallowed him whole. "This is Captain Elias Voss. The event horizon is gone. The black hole took it, took them." His voice cracked, the words sticking to his throat like tar. "But I don't think it's over." The marks, he glanced at his forearm where the luminous sigils had faded to bone-white scars. They pulsed faintly, not with light, but with something deeper, as if whatever had etched them into his skin was simply waiting. A sound cut through the silence, not static, not the creak of settling metal. A knock, delicate, precise. 3 slow raps against the exterior of his ruined shuttle. The recorder slipped from his grip, tumbling end over end in the zero-gravity haze as his breath fogged the visor. No ship should have been able to find him here, not in this nameless stretch of dead space, not after the singularity's pull had scattered his trajectory like ash in a storm. Yet the knocking came again, closer now, rhythmic, almost playful, the kind of knock you'd use to announce yourself to an old friend. Voss's pulse hammered against his ribs as he turned, his helmet lamps casting jagged shadows across the shuttle's cracked viewport. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the stars winked out, not eclipsed, not obscured, vanished as if a vast, patient eye had blinked. The darkness left in their absence wasn't empty. It bent, twisted, resolved into a shape that pressed against the glass from the other side, something that wore a human silhouette the way a predator wears the bones of its prey. His breath hitched, the recorder, still spinning, caught the final words before the transmission died. "It's not a ship, it's a TH." The knock came a third time. Not on the hull anymore, on the inside of his helmet.